is also Scott's also published by Tailwinds Press, that published my book, The Many Fentanyl Addicted Wraiths of Sault Ste. Marie. And tragically, the sort of matriarch of Tailwinds Press, Sharon Kerr, passed away very suddenly this year. And like Montag, it was also a one-woman labor of love. She was an environmental lawyer and used her, her income to run this press. And she's a very good editor. She's very thoughtful. Just say a quick personal note about her. I had an accident in New York City, and she was the only person I sort of knew in New York City, and she was ready to book me anywhere I needed to be, drive me anywhere I needed to be until I got home safe. So she really went above and beyond. And Scott, maybe you can talk about your experience with Sharon.
Oh yeah, I mean, she definitely this was a labor of love. She was an environmental lawyer, but she also had a degree in English literature from Yale, and she was an incredibly careful reader. This was her side gig that she really loved more than her actual job, and so she put together, six full press seasons or series, as she called them, and she passed away at 42 with a couple of small kids, and it was really tragic and out of nowhere. And of course, this is my first novel. I feel like she was kind of the midwife to the book and to me becoming a novelist. So I'm forever indebted to her and her memory. And a couple of years ago, she did a Zoom book release, and I watched the whole thing. And she gave a kind of mission statement to how the press operated. She said, "People send me manuscripts, and I choose the most beautiful and brilliant ones that I like the most. And I can't think of anything more radical than to let your own vision and your own aesthetics be seen and heard, and help create things that you believe to be beautiful and good." And I've read about half of the catalog of Tailwinds at this point. I could say that I could see where she's coming from, and every one of the books is the most beautiful and brilliant ones that I'm sure she came across. And it's in her memory that I think that this is uh, good. And obviously, your wonderful book here, The Many Fentanyl Addicted Wraiths, is fantastic. And so I'm looking forward to reading the new one, which just came this morning. So Memory of Sharon.
Indeed. So here's to Sharon. And so basically the format for tonight is Scott has a video of him reading from his new book. It is out now, right?
Yep, yep.
Yeah. So available now, and we'll put a link in the chat. So I actually blurbed that book, so I thought as a introduction, I'll just read my blurb. Here it is. Even where the working class kids carry AK-47s in their gym bags, the Christ myth has the cannibalistic qualities of a snuff film, and planned spaces are suffocating as a loss of eternity to a vengeful creator. Dimovitz shines the gift of his maglite through all this peripetal doom to seek origins, universal salvation in a text of intentional form, both conscious and unconscious. That's a quote. In a text of America that, like the Hess Brothers building, is as nascent as its own creation. And now, without further ado, maybe Scott, we want to introduce your video?
I recorded it earlier today just to make sure this all goes smoothly. So I think that the framework should be in there. So Andrew, give it a shot.
Hi, my name is Scott Dimovitz, and I'll be reading from my novel, The Joy Divisions, which came out this month. The novel is named after the post-punk band who were very popular back in the 80s and very influential afterwards. It's set 30 years ago in 1993, and it is a literary satire about a young architecture school dropout named Ed Pullman who gets recruited to join an underground art collective called the Kinfolk, a group of alternative misfits trying to save the world with performance art. So, to set the tone, this passage I'm going to read first describes Philadelphia's old goth punk hangout area called South Street, which had a store called Zipperhead, which was very cool. 6 giant black ants crawled over the facade of 407 South Street, a Dali painting come to life. Zipperhead was a store unlike any back in Allentown, and even before he started college, Ed and his girlfriend would make monthly pilgrimages 65 miles south in his gold 1977 Pontiac Sunbird to the goth punk accessories store that the Dead Milkmen's song Punk Rock Girl ironically immortalized the year before. Zipperhead crystallized everything Ed loved about South Street's goth punk scene. The front of the store sported a 3-story zipper, halfway open with one of the ant statues scuttling from the spreading teeth. 2 pictures of normal-looking guys flanked the iconic sign, each face impassive, even though its brain was in the process of being exposed. The store opened in 1980, its shelves crammed with all the equipment necessary to uniform the abused and depressed, the outcast and dispossessed. Doc Martens and dog collars, bondage bracelets with locks and latches, leather jackets and pleather pants patched with studs, spikes, and buckles, in sometimes apparently random patterns. Real leather whips for only $10. Manic Panic hair dye in kaleidoscopic colors. Atomic turquoise, bad boy blue, purple haze. White face paint and black lipstick to complete the 19th century cadaver fetish. Hand-screened shirts with logos and messages to amuse and offend the masses, with an almost obsessive repetition of Charles Manson and David Berkowitz images. Posters and t-shirts advertising the bands that rarely made it to the mainstream radio stations. The Misfits, the Dead Kennedys, the Damned. Then there were the post-punk goth and alternative bands, less hardcore but still within the realm of acceptable marginalization. The Cure, The Church, Camper Van Beethoven. This world shat from the excesses of prog rock and the triviality of disco, fermented as the alternative to Ronald Reagan's Morning in America of pastel yellow polo shirts and members-only jackets. This world where Ed felt most at home. Ed and his friend Kevin entered the zipper. From the loudspeakers, the melancholic baritone of the Joy Division's singer Ian Curtis announced their arrival like the sound of their lives. Love, love will tear us apart, again. 10 years earlier, Curtis had taken his life, hanging himself with a kitchen washing line after fighting with his wife, a viciously ironic domestic denouement. Ed always felt a strong connection to Joy Division's lyrics, and he wondered vaguely if he liked the lyrics because of his own tendencies, or if the music reinforced his own bleakening worldview. Did art reflect reality, or did it create it? Lost in his reflection, Ed found himself staring at a display of novelty sex toys that shocked him. What circle of hell, he wondered, for the creator of the Baby Jesus butt plug? He blushed and spun around to see if anyone was watching, and he clamped his gaze at a display of talking Beetlejuice dolls. So that gives you a little sense of the kind of world that Ed is living in. Later, Ed and Kevin run into an old friend of theirs from Allentown, who's become a bit of an acid freak over the last year. I'm telling you, Ed, Todd's got plans, man. The plan. The voice squealed greasy over the diner din and the power chord chomp of Tony Iommi's guitar and Ozzy Osbourne's plaintive howl that blared through the restaurant's sound system. I can't believe it's only been 9 months since you left. It's just totally different now. Allentown's getting this vibe. Everyone's up in arms, literally with the kids. Allen High's got real cops now. You get that? Real fucking cops. The kids are carrying AK-47s and gym bags. That's how you can tell when the bag's weighed down. My kid brother's still there, man. AK-47s? Shit. What did we have, huh? Couple 3 knife fights at worst. At worst. Ed Pullman sat erect, staring at this shifting gnome of a human specimen, trying to remember Serge, the shade of his former self, whom, despite his estimate, Ed had not seen in over a year. It was around Christmas break when Serge, Freak Ferguson, and Tim the Enchanter were graduating to bigger and better produce, opium and acid to be precise. The grad school of produce studies, Ed supposed, before moving on to postdoc work in angel dust and smack. In the year and a half it had been since Ed last saw him, Serge had metamorphosed from a prostrate slacker, prone to impromptu speeches about the similarity between the veins in a leaf to the veins in his hand, to this bobbing homunculus, expletive-heavy and with an apocalyptic, glassy red stare. It's a fucking race war, Serge said. We see it coming, Eddie. I can see it. Todd says the brothers have been down for too long. Black over white, you know what it's like, man. The Compton brothers get more and more people at every one of their parties, all in their swastikas and shit. And we got it coming, Eddie. You know we do. I can see it. It shall come to blood. Ed tilted his head like a dog hearing a whistle in the distance and let his dyed black hair flop back to its normal dangle over his left eye. The shawl hung in the air, prophetic and weirdly out of place. Serge was quoting, but from whom and for what purpose? So, thank you.
Oh, great stuff. You're getting a hand from Mrs. Lanfranco It's nice. So the format basically is now I'm going to read a bit from my book, and then Andrew's going to read a bit from his book, and then we're going to have a bit of a discussion. Sorry, my messenger is going crazy here. Then we'll have a bit of a discussion. So if you have any comments on Scott's reading, we can also, we'll obviously take questions from the audience, those of you kindly assembled. So I guess I will then now begin reading from How to Market Your Grief blog. So here is the book. And I'm going to read now the first two short entries. Actually, I guess I'll wait for Andrew to get the slides going. So I just have some visuals to accompany my reading, so you don't have to just stare at me. Okay. If, as time passes, memories delude us with their transience and telescopy, be pleased that the only change in Catherine is a faint grace added to the fundament of her beauty. If eye contact proves too powerful for everyone's tastes, look away, then immediately look back again. If effects precede causes in some inertial frames, your glasses could cloud the knowing before you. Crush them underfoot. 1. If here comes her ghost again, and her peacoat is free of detritus, as her peacoats somehow always are, and you wear a younger man's clothes, and there you stand on Bleecker Street in the fixity of your fiction suits, press your palms against her hips, which hips you once complimented as ample, and while she said this was not a compliment per se, you forever remained unconvinced. 2. Should a joke seem necessary to leaven the tension of a reunion 15 years in the making, speak the words, "Our long national nightmare is over. Abraham Lincoln said that. Sure is nice to see you again. I said that." 3. Though you find the substance neurotoxic, get unethically traded coffee in a multinational franchise. And while no more cosmopolitan than all the franchises from Seoul to Sault Ste. Marie, it is in Manhattan and contains the girl to whom all your longings speak. Thus fulfilling a promise, once trod into the soil of a St. Joseph's Island farm, with her as sundress Juliet, and thee as the holy fool, Balthazar. 4. Still at a loss for words, but in a high comradeship of spirit, do not be romanced by the ceilings of the New York Public Library's Stephen A. Schwarzman building. Don't pontificate on man, blessed man, 19th century Giuseppe or whomever, up on some literal ladder to the stars, sculpting those ceilings to resemble the Sistine Chapels, because if you get distracted photographing the ceilings, you may lose her again. She could step away and leave you nothing but the ceiling, and then the pictures of the ceiling, which is one of the most photographed ceilings in America, meaning it's there, but no one can really see it. 5. Do not have a religious experience at a Bob Dylan concert, lest those similarly afflicted congregate at the Dublin House, where she will make friends, as her winsomeness not only allows, but dictates, where if her past precarity is any indicator, she will flit maddeningly on the periphery like a floater caused by clumped vitreous in the aged. If a suave bobcat remarks, "Your girlfriend and I should get a motel room," punch the man's chin such that his brain collides with his skull, sending him out of that evening's sex economy. If asked to decamp by Dublin Mike, a 60-year-old bartender in the Irish Mickey Ward vein, who's seen so much he appears bored even in the act of breaking up a fight, then place your forearm on Mike's bar and sweep a dozen pints and shots and snifters crashing to the ground, causing Dublin Mike to raise his fists in the classic "put your dukes up" position, a posture that would seem hilariously vaudevillian were he less hell-bent on pummeling you. 6. If pulled to safety by Catherine, recite the last two verses of "O Sister" from 1974's Desire to reassert your sensitivity after the recent milieu of general beastliness. If she finds your earnestness wearying, double down on your gratitude that she's been mysteriously saved. 7. If you and Catherine have never sampled the delights of the marriage bed, and Catherine seems more inclined towards the solitary restfulness of the Airbnb's living room couch, ask her, wouldn't it be sad if the memories from the old life had to last us our whole life? 8. If Catherine's moral virtue supersedes yours, she'll reject your dawn-tide repackaging of the night's transgressions and insist you return to the Dublin House to apologize. If your usual strategy of avoidance, minimum 1 year, hasn't been knocking it out of the park lately, why not give this contrition angle the old college try? With every nerve ending frayed and afeared of more raised dukes, approach Mike to say, "I was an asshole." If Mike then looks into your blood-red eyes with more empathy than you've deserved in many years and quotes, "A man's attitude," A man's attitude goes some ways, the way his life will be. Is that something you agree with? And you quote back, sure, sure. And Dublin Mike continues, now, did you answer because you thought that's what I wanted to hear? Or did you think about what I said and answer because you truly believe that to be right? And you say, I agree with what you said, truthfully. And Dublin Mike replies, what'd I say? His smile should reveal that this is a rib. If Mike says, hadn't seen the old full bar sweep in some time, what Mike must mean is, this has happened to all we intemperate individuals before, and the infernal serpent knows it will happen to all of us again. So if we won't forgive, what good is even being alive? 9. If St. Patrick's Cathedral is a free and ornate place to request penance for all the cardinal sins recently committed, a desanctified place where tourists take altar selfies during communion, and no one knows the head-tapping maneuvers required for the responsorial psalms, yet if you are holding her hand again after all this time, the cloud of forgetting behind you, and the neo-Gothic setting is like Batman's house, bloody palm wounds on the stained glass, Jesus pretty adamant about having died for our sins, then get down on your knees and pray. For if the psalmist speaks, then Jesus, answering, said to her, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it done to thee as thou wilt. Then that means she must choose. 10. If a father and son band played Dixieland jazz by the Central Park pond, from which Holden Caulfield's stupid ducks once migrated, or perhaps froze to death, lie your hoodie on the cold, wet grass for her to sit upon, and fold your legs into hers. Place your forehead against hers and say, those hair vitamins you buy are worth every last dime. In the Guggenheim, take pictures of Orpheus and Hades by, I'm not going to pronounce that name, Pierre-Amédée Marcel Béronneau. Take pictures of Jean Delville's portrait of the Grand Masters of the Rosicrucians in choir dress by Josephine Paladin. Buy postcards of the paintings, even though the pictures already exist in higher quality on Google Images. Because when the mystical symbolists were convinced to convey the peculiarities of God, they weren't conveying anything so peculiar as a disappeared loved object. And if you recall that not Lincoln, but Gerald Ford spoke the words, our long national nightmare is over, and that your photographic memory should not have permitted you to forget this, understand under your sweaty blogger's bedsheets, back in the corporeal world in which the spiritual world subsists, this is another cruel dream. She was never yours for more than an evening at a time. For just as she might have been, another man, perhaps needing her as much, but certainly not more, maybe only a man who believed his own gimmick more concretely than you, came along and spoke the words, you're always running away from things. Other directed as she was, and no less impressionable, Catherine couldn't run away from such a declaration. If this is the case, try to discontinue consciousness to find some last remnants of her to be stolen from the mouths of the Mawasis at the Bronx Zoo. If as ever, these vestigial dreams involve only the loss of the loved object across subway platforms, losing Catherine in the crowded bar, losing Catherine to the circus fiend, to superior causes, to all the hard luck wolves of the night, losing her at Calvary and in the demilitarized zone and in crummy old Windsor, Ontario, then hang down your head and cry. Okay, that was a bit much. The second one is lighter and funnier, so I hope you can tolerate. This will be a little shorter too, so just bear with me here. Some tips towards the monetization of a grief blog. Forgive me, readers, should you think it crass that my sophomore effort in the grief space is concerned with the marketing of a grief blog. However, if you are not consoling a wide audience of the grief-stricken and ergo achieving traffic and commensurate remuneration, then why write a grief blog in the first place? 1. Avoid what is known as direct marketing. Do not Facebook message an acquaintance to ask if they count themselves among the stricken. Do not ghoulishly troll the obits. 2. Be yourself. Do not emulate grief bloggers who have already achieved traffic and remuneration. The stricken will smell a rat. Avoid books like Chicken Soup for the Grieving Soul, lest you imitate the tepid style therein, a style that has already oversaturated the grief marketplace. 3. If Eisenstein wrote in the structure of the film, there is no such thing as grief in general. Grief is concrete. It is always attached to something. It has consumers. That means you must avoid wishy-washy tenses. Employ the imperative tense. When necessary, employ the counterfactual. 4. Like and share other grief bloggers. Unbecoming as it often feels, sharing 10 consecutive articles from Grievin' Gary's Grief Refuge will capture Grievin' Gary's attention. Sharing one will not. Sharing one will make you no more estimable in grieving Gary's eyes than some grief-stricken Mark. 5. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. As Daniel Johnson famously sang, millions and millions of people have already died. Thousands will die today, to say nothing of pets, catastrophic brain injuries, and those enduring a type of living death due to opioid dependence. Among the scant few not yet grieving, you can count on anticipatory grief, e.g., father ridden with cancer. There is also a sort of nameless dread, a fatalistic grief for the unknown sorrows to come, such as the prospect of a worldwide pandemic, a new filovirus, for example. 6. Don't display your grief bona fides right out of the chute. Little is more tiresome than the grief blogger flogging a deceased bull terrier for every last click and share. Granted, bona fides in absentia, questions may rise, e.g., just what is this guy griping and grieving about anyways? They'll get past this, the grief-stricken, because they really don't care. Such is their bottomless need for consolation. Besides, who among us has not known grief in one or more of its many manifestations? The grief of the non-historical nature of time, the grief of parasitism and the personal protection equipment during the filoviral outbreak to come, the grief of the sinister hobbies, e.g. inveigling, e.g. deceit, the grief of the coins accidentally eaten while on Ambien, the coins presumed to be mints. The grief of time and narrative, quote, it is remarkable that it is language usage that provisionally provides the resistance to the thesis of non-being. That's Paul Ricoeur. The grief of the unread cybergothic, wherein time produces itself in a circuit, passing through the virtual interruption of what is to come, in order that the future which arrives is already infected. The grief of the coroner's doubts is detailed in Redbook magazine. The grief of who the heck propagates this theory of non-being anyways? The non-tologists? The grief of your murdered sister. The grief of the downward sloping marginal utility curve, e.g. fifth burger in a row, only 5% as satisfying as the first burger, e.g. same with roller coaster rides, sexual triumphs, all life's phony pleasures. The grief of alcohol, pills, and the fluorescent lit morning to follow. The grief of the archons bedeviling us since time immemorial. The grief of a sister's shampoo in the springtime, its scent and its memory. The grief of the intrapsychic crypt. The grief of not having enough, quote, grease to go to the brothel, in the words of Donald Bartlemy, author of the seminal grief novel, The Dead Father. The grief of a kind of causal Darwinism called post-selection that governs the flow of information backwards and forwards to the glass block of Minkowski spacetime. In the words of Eric Wargo, author of Time Loops, Precognition, Retrocausation, and the Unconscious. Information refluxing into the past that only survives is meaningful insofar as it cannot be used to foreclose the future that sent that information. Meaning, sadly, you can't save your sister Catherine from being beheaded on the side of Highway 17. 7. Get featured on blogs like What's Your Grief that often review the hottest grief blogs. 8. Know that the bar to entry at national grief conferences is refreshingly low. 9. Don't blog of clues in Catherine's obit pointing to archons or maybe the infernal serpent being behind all this sadness, as archon-focused blogging and small press publishing yields next to nothing remuneration-wise and can only lessen your standing in the grief blogging space. Never mention the archons to your prescribing doctor. If you must discuss archons, try to position them as a type of malevolent AI perpetrating nonlinear causational tyranny on humankind. Don't mention how you may be implicated in all this. Steer clear of the word Gnosticism in discussions with your doctor, and with all others. 10. Don't get in a maudlin headspace prior to composition. Listening to the Cowboy Junkies, the Trinity sessions is what the grieving are already doing. Listen to something fun, like Back in the New York Groove, to remind readers that, hey, life can be a party, and it's time to delete that folder of Catherine pictures and maybe blog about something more remunerative, such as the Soda Stream. Whew, thank you. I guess awkwardly, I'm also sort of handling the MC, so now there'll be no break from my horrific voice. But now there will be a nice break because Andrew Brenza is going to present, and he has a much more engaging multimedia presentation for us. Do you want to say a few words, Andrew?
Sure. those of you who know my work, you probably won't be surprised that this is the book that I've made is a series of visual poetry. But for this presentation, I actually had a friend who goes by Alka in his professional capacity, who is a musician. And he was kind enough to take some of my some of the slides from Pod, some of the images, and the texts that recordings of me reading the texts that produced those images and made this piece. So here it is. Sorry, everyone. Something happened there.
Andrew's been saddled with almost all tech responsibilities. There's a lot on Andrew. We should be very grateful and afford him some our utmost patience. There we go.
There we go. Is that? Let's see. Oh, here we go.
Subatomic horrors coalesce as disintegrated consciousness, formal consolidation via bonds of insubstantial distress. Maintain trajectory toward pre-genetic interventions, distill egoic influence prior to emergence. Only as potential does actuality exist. Only as potential does actuality exist. Only as potential does actuality exist. So many machines, alive and singing in a single room. I sit by mine, others sit with theirs. It is a large room, full of bodies and machines, alive and singing in a single room, like what once was. Resist temptations to impel boundary coordination. Peripheral obscurity is a necessary proviso. Sentience neither begins nor ends, but vaguely decries itself. Instruct self-infliction circuitry via magnetic aura manipulation. Capitalize on locus of chromosomal extracts, affixing trans-experiential intimations particle by particle. Darkness eliminates itself into a discretionary visceral micromanagement. Maintain durability of unmitigated insight into the nourishment and excretionary protocols. With 1,000 others, I am called to the primary evaluation center, where I wait with rain-burned skin for the doors to open. With 1,000 others, red rain reeking in my clothes, skin burning, I wait for the opening of the primary evaluation center. With 1,000 others, I take my place in line at the primary evaluation center. My skin stings under my wet clothes, red with rain. Regenerative apprehension identified within vacated nuclei. Historical scarring evidenced in suboptimal mitotic state. Subjected to intense but benign concentrations of photostimuli, inferior cell replications writhe in imagined suffering. Notice this and move on. 85% of malfunctions correct themselves if seen. With 1,000 others, a red rain upon me, burning as I stand before the primary evaluation center. With 1,000 others, I arrive at the primary evaluation center to stand in the fiery rain, waiting to be let in. My wet skin red and burning in the long line of thousands, waiting at the primary evaluation center. Outside, with 1,000 others, I wait with burned skin and burning rain. Aftershock of manifested sentience, registered as surrounding space gently warped. Prompt, avert sensors. Prompt, suspend observation. Temporary obscurity fosters sense of independence, however delusional. Conformity of self-interest can serve as context. Because darkness is aware of itself, I am aware of darkness. Here and there, we are to be aware of how meanings meet their own ends. A light forms, and darkness withdraws into itself. Like a wave receding, it exposes space in which body, that uneven fluid, arises, readying for return. A light forms, and darkness recedes itself. It is like a fallow field at the back edge of winter, ready to return. As per mandatory generational attrition in each observable corporeal contribution, time is dead. Be grateful. Electric fusion with interface. Prismatic bands of light mark progress to eternity. Engagement of next iterative consciousness begun. My being a sedentary monitor in the round of perpetuity. Tuned to its development, my wires drone with uncountable voices while saying the same thing. Fortuitous exchanges in subatomic energetics are measurable in macro expressions of emotion. That is, some quarks just get sadder than others, however charming their movement. Monitor involuntary verbal output for acceptable, effective ranges. Realign protonic substratum as appropriate. Core of Ouroboros reproduction. Thread of Kadushian governance. Packets of emotive transfer between coded probabilities. Mechanical, material, divine divisiveness.
Well, that was excellent. Just to catch everyone up who might not have been here earlier, I edited that book as well as Andrew's previous book with Montag, and my book and his are the first two books of a new imprint called Ghost Truth. But as someone who familiar with that text, that presentation of it really it adds a lot, doesn't it? It's really like I would you should maybe think about getting that full length on Audible or something. I wonder if that's an option.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely pressure Alka to see if he wants to do the whole thing at some point. That would be very cool.
So just to let everyone know, now we're just gonna have like a short 5-ish minute discussion about our two books. Anyone that has a question for either of us or for Scott, you could either raise your hand or just unmute and just jump in. It'd be nice to hear some different voices. Maybe I'll point the finger at Charlie. Charlie, you probably have something to say. Yeah, why don't we just start? So having edited your two books, and I still I'm clumsy whenever I email you. Sometimes I refer to the word art as Vispo, but I don't really know if it's always that. And I think a lot of people, everyone appreciates it. Like everyone that looks at it is impressed, but people don't quite know what to call it. So just tell us what the heck this stuff is, I guess.
Well, I'm not sure people know quite yet what it is. Some people call it visual poetry, Vispo, concrete poetry. Some people use neo-concrete. I think probably the most generic term is probably visual poetry or Vispo, and I just kind of stick with that one. But generally, the idea is to kind of, make writing and reading strange in a way. By taking language and taking it out of its usual context of sentences that run left to right. One becomes kind of aware of that that written language and language is man-made, that it's artificial. And also, in my process, I do a lot of layering of these texts over each other, as well as feed them through other programs to create the effects. You know, I hope that it creates a more open experience, so to speak.
Well, one of the things I like, while it is open, I also like that you're not scared to like obfuscate, or like your words aren't so precious to you that you'll render them in ways that may be unreadable. I find that quite cool because, we're all producing all this this work, and it all gets out there. So it's like I like the idea that you're willing to sort of be, maybe hiding in plain sight is the wrong term, but you're willing to cloak it in these techniques that make it sort of more difficult to get at immediately.
Yeah, definitely. I guess I always really like adding something that's unknowable to the text. I mean, I just think that's sort of like a fundamental human experience that, we'll never get our minds around at all. I like to include that part, quite literally in the things I create.
Cool.
But yeah, going to you. I mean, that was very. I really enjoyed the second portion. That was very funny. Of your reading. But I was just curious. Obviously the kind of structure seems to be in kind of like a top 10 kind of lists. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I was just kind of wondering how you might have came up with that, and what you were shooting for.
Yeah, it started. I knew I wanted to write a novel about sort of retrocausality and these bigger issues, but then one day I just sat down and I was sort of trying to write just like a short humor piece, and the idea of how to market your grief blog came to me, and I thought that was quite rich, but I thought it would just be like a one-off humor thing. And then I discovered the sort of this technique that I go back to over and over again, is that he's talking to a you that is clearly him, right? And so, some of the advice is like in that first entry is like fairly practical, but as the novel goes on, and he goes to hell at one point, he's on Skid Row, and he's giving this advice that the average person is not, like he's talking about, how to make money selling hypodermic needles on Skid Row or something, right? Like this is not the average reader's like need. So yeah, and I work at a university, and I've worked at colleges in just like a support capacity. So I've been in a lot of like college English classes, and they'll teach like persuasive writing, and it can be very cloying. And I really like to sort of take the piss out of that style of writing, I guess. So that's kind of the approach. But similar to, I wouldn't say it's a risk, but it's like if you're repeating the same structures over and over again, you have to really come up with a lot of different methods so that you don't just start to sound clunky. So it's like I sort of like these self-imposed challenges, or God knows I make enough of them in my personal life and my writing life. So yeah, I like having that challenge, because otherwise you can write anything. So you got to rein it in somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, sometimes the restrictions can be more productive.
Yeah. So I know you're quite prolific. In addition to these two Montag and now Ghost Truth books, you have books with a number of presses, and you're always publishing in various journals. So what do you have on the horizon?
Well, I do have another book coming out in a couple months from Hinga Press called Colorways. Surprisingly, it is another book of visual poetry, but also with some more standard looking poems as well, interspersed. The nice thing about this one, it'll be in color, so I'm really excited about that one. How about yourself?
Uh, you don't want to know. I've been working on this book called The Introductions. People might have seen some of the drafts on Substack, but I've been working on it for 4 years now. It's a big task. It's a big mess, but I think I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So I think I might be close to finishing it. But actually, that takes us back to Scott, because I've been unduly influenced by Mr. James Joyce and Finnegan's Wake, and I employ some of, not this is not to imply that with any sort of his facility, but I do employ some of the methods, and I've become more and more isolated from what the common reader enjoys. So Scott, your book is, I'm going to ask you a question, Scott, just so you're prepared. So your book is so Scott is a eminent professor. He teaches James Joyce among other subjects, but his book is very, accessible and readable. So it's like, where do you sort of draw that line between the pyrotechnics you admire and then the kind of, I'm not going to say crowd pleasing because that makes it sound like it's, playing to a crowd, but like, you know what I'm talking about. Accessibility, readability, etc.
I was going to ask you both the same question, so that's great. Yeah, James Joyce kind of destroyed me for about 20 years because I did this long independent study and then research on him, and I was like, well, I can't possibly write anything better than this, and so I should just stop. And I tried to write the book that I have, and I got about 100 pages in. It was just bad James Joyce and bad William Faulkner, talking on either sides of my shoulders, and that kind of that put me off for a long time. And so it was coming back and realizing that it didn't have to be that, that pyrotechnic. That said, I love pyrotechnic and I love both of your readings today. And I mean, Andrew, God, the Vispo, it reminds me of stuff I've seen, and I say this in the best way, of something like out of like Meow Wolf, or I don't know if you've been there, but like just these wonderful, meditations on time and language, and mixed with all the visuals and with the wonderful sound. And of course, Mike, you really should do an audio book because you're making fun of yourself, but you have a hysterical rhythm in terms of that second reading, especially. But I was curious about both of you as well. I don't think that my book was necessarily pandering.
No, I could see it. It's
No,
vaguely
no.
that. It's not what I meant at all, but yeah.
Right. No, I definitely do. There's a couple chapters in there that are emulating styles of Joyce or Faulkner or Wolf, but it's not the dominant mode. But obviously, apparently, all three of us are engaged in some form of maximalism, which is not exactly the dominant mode in the big five publishing industry. And I'm wondering how you negotiate that as well, in the sense of I've read plenty of the top books this year in the big five, and nothing moved me as much as what the two of you just read right now. And I'm just curious, like, how do you see your work in relationship to the big five publishing conglomeration?
Andrew, you want to go?
Sure. I mean, I guess I don't really think about them much anymore. You just kind of I'm at the point where I kind of have found my interests and enjoy what I do, and have forgiven myself for not writing like a New Yorker essayist or something like that. So and I I just go with it now.
Yeah. Like if you have an eye patch and a club foot and no teeth, you're probably not, and this is referring to myself, you're not thinking about like the prettiest girl in school or whatever. You're saying you're just thinking about getting by. No, you know what? I'm going to post a link to an interview I just did where I talked about this subject, but one of my philosophies is like, if George Saunders can top the bestseller list, like he's working in that mode and he just does it exceptionally well. And he does it in a way that entertains people. So I don't like to make excuses based on like blaming the market, although I could blame the market endlessly. Like, don't get me started on, I don't know how bad Barnes and Noble is in the States, but in Canada, like Chapters Indigo, it's basically like a pillow store at this point. Like, like just like book themed, duvets and stuff. So it's all quite bleak. But yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, like the numbers are quite small with small press publishing, but it's like once in a while someone you didn't expect was like, oh yeah, I ordered your book on Amazon, and like it's a strange experience to have someone read an entire book you wrote, especially if it's like fairly personal. It's like, well, you know a lot about me now, it's gonna be quite challenging. But no, I mean, I'm always striving to get better, and I do believe that if you can do something to the absolute, like whatever you choose to do, if you can do it as well as it can possibly be done, like there is going to be some recognition eventually, although there may not be. But yeah, I don't really have an answer. Like I no longer cater to like market desires, because there's no point. Like at one point I had an agent and I wrote a young adult book trying to do that, and it got close. Like I had the agent, but it didn't get there. And then I just didn't have the energy to do it again. I had the energy to do it like exactly once. So yeah, that's where I'm at. So we should probably, in the interest of time, keep things moving. So Andrew has another video, and I have a shorter reading. So we're just going to do those, and that's going to wrap things up. So before we go to that, does anyone have any questions? Anyone want to unmute and ask something of any of us? I'm going to give 40 seconds to see if anyone responds. See how uncomfortable it gets, and then see if anyone puts their hand up in 40 seconds. No, I'm just kidding. Going once. Going twice. Mark C., any questions? Mr. Capincioni? It's a no. Is anyone here? Is anyone here? Okay. So
Charlie did ask a question for
true. Charlie's always present. Yeah, by the way, I did Charlie is the publisher of Montag Press. We wouldn't be here without him and his efforts and his largesse. Oh, he's giving us a hand. Thank you. Thank you, sir. All right, then. So that was your last chance. I'm going to read my final thing. Andrew's going to play his, and then I guess we can stick around for a couple minutes after, so it's not too abrupt of a departure. All right. So I guess I should give some context now. This second one is like much deeper in the novel. So a lot goes on. The narrator is in a sort of has made a sort of Faustian bargain. He has to teach his son what's going to bring about this sort of AI apocalypse. So he has to teach his son to code, and then there's a outbreak of Ebola, and this is the blurb on the back of the book. Like, I did write this book about foreknowledge. Like, I read a lot of theology, like divine foreknowledge, and about retrocausation, and about ideas, manifesting themselves through art before the artist had any way of knowing them. And I did write an entire book about this pandemic. Like, I was basically finished it by like 2018 or so. So it is an odd feeling to then see the pandemic play out. You start to feel like kind of crazy, but then you realize, there's the law of large numbers and other reasons why, patterns, tend to replicate. But so anyways, we're now at the point where he's reconciled with the beloved sister. He had to go to a different world line to do that. And they are now going to lovely Sudbury, Ontario to get their Ebola vaccines. So here we go. If asked to sign a waiver abdicating the WHO of responsibility for any depersonalization, ontological uncertainty, splitting, mixed mood states, dissociation, inappropriate guilt, general cheerlessness, and etc., and if the inherent Wertversprechen is not having your organs liquefy into yellow slime, then sign that old John Hancock on the dotted line. 1. Stand in another line. Receive the injection. Watch as your sister receives hers. Notice her hiccuping has stopped. Recognize a second face in her old loved face. Take her hand and realize borderline personality disorder is not a deficit, but a surplus. This is a side effect of the vaccine. I should give that context. You get borderline personality disorder when you take the Ebola vaccine. Love her more than you ever have. In this love, know a depth of fear you've never conceived possible. A fear of what could happen so soon as the evening. Abandonment. 2. Think of all the friends you once knew, the old gang. Think of how all the books and records of a lifetime could never replace an elaborate handshake developed by a gang of teenage boys. Understand all the love in a life is part of one big chain, every link corroded and breakable by any half-hearted yank. 3. Hug your sister. Feel the lines that separate you from her blurring. Know that a part of you has been missing for nearly 20 years. Know that she's back again. Know that she's only back again for now. Know those old distentio animi blues, meaning time is a dimension of the soul. Ask, is this a dream? Tempt fate a time or two by snapping your fingers and saying, wake up. 4. If urged towards the American Borderline Personality Disorder Association's card table, politely take their brochure and pay your $75 membership fee. Provide your mailing address. If the Ambopedia flack seated behind the card table is insulted by your disinterest in Ambopedia's annual boat line of Borderlines cruise and screams stop consonants at you so plosively that a globule of his agitated spittle enters your mouth, realize this demeanor is dictated by his affliction. 5. If you feel empty, even in the explosive presence of the Ambopedia community, then hug your sister as a means of clinging to your own strict identity, your own thoughts, your own feelings, all of which have grown increasingly dissolute. 6. Recall how Catherine is always running away from things. Try to push her away before she can abandon you. Grow conciliatory. Have a screaming fight. Rinse and repeat. 7. Grieve some more. Grief of the demon in the freezer. The grief of the freezer fry, McCain, Cavendish, etc. The grief of object cathexis. The grief of reality testing. The grief of the absence of stain. The grief of biniodide of mercury, which some members of the Ambopedia community advocate for. The grief of sex intensified. The grief of the avoidant personality. The grief of withdrawal into all the records and books of a lifetime. Sailor moon mornings on the Chesterfield. An intergluteal cleft seen through the 6x6 sauna window. The grief of the clusters, A, B, C. The grief of the unstable temperament. 7. Miss Baby Marcel Proust. That's the son's name in the book. Miss Baby Marcel Proust, whom you have abandoned in another world. 8. Miss Adolescence. The last time you experienced unadulterated, which is to say, unmedicated joy. 9. Try to remember just who you may be. A lovelorn brother, a scared little boy, a screeching evangelical, Joe College, the Frisbee expert, a man who'd curse where he came from, wherever that might have been, a lecher, a reality show star and new tropical spokesman, a colleague to Ryerson Professor Claus J. Cray, a knight of infinite faith, yet quencher of eternal thirsts, a slow-pitch singles hitter, clean line drives up the middle, an endurer of 37 winters, a victim of the Hells Angels and of the Bloods, and hence a TBI sufferer and percipient of hazed cognitions, a histrionic even before the vaccine, but also a sacred executioner, and thus an agent of obfuscation, a liquefactionist waiting upon the final absorption, and so obviously a dupe, a believer. 10. Feel like a remnant of something past. Okay, thank you, everyone. That's my time.
All right. I have one other video for you guys that was also done with Alka, but with a slightly different sort of procedure. These instead of there's no recording of me reading them. What he did was use the visual images to feed into a computer program, which would then interpret them as sound. So it's going to be a series of what I wrote, the physical images in the book, with the sound accompanying them. But before I begin that, I would just like to get to the commercial portion of our event here. And as an incentive for you all to buy either or both of our books, or Scott's book as well, I would be happy to send any of you a copy of my adult coloring book, which has abstract images for you to color, as well as some poems for end times in them to enjoy. And it comes with a nice paintbrush too. So just DM me on Facebook and I will be happy to send you one of those. Now for the piece. How does this happen? There we go. And thank you all for attending.
For Charlie's request, I'll just say a couple words at the end about Ghost Truth as well. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Wow,
Right, and that's it.
that's something. Okay, so Charlie just asked me to mention Ghost Truth again briefly. So logo doesn't appear very well here, but it's a new imprint of Montag Press. And some of the inspiration is, all these publishers say they want things weird, but they're not really weird. So the idea would be theory. I don't want to say academic writing, but some theory, open to poetry as well. But some of the, like a book that really inspired me was Aberration in the Heartland of the Real by Dr. Wendy S. Painting. It's like a 1,000-page dissection of what sort of created Timothy McVeigh and the perceptions around him and the reality. So the idea is that the publisher would be focused on, the sort of everyday weirdness of our reality, trying to sort it out in an epistemic fashion, and not like, as our market discussion indicated earlier, there's really not much to lose, so I'm not afraid of veering into conspiratorial waters. There's a publisher called Trine Day that publishes a very strange mix of like very hard researched, books about the insane minutia of the Kennedy assassination that, written by professors. And then the most dangerous book in the world, 9/11, is Mass Ritual, which is just like absolutely insane, right? It's like the ravings of a madman, basically. So I like that they don't really care. Like they're outside of the bounds of normalcy and they can do all this strange stuff. So I'm just that's the hope to sort of get into all this weird stuff with a sort of fearless mentality. So I put the website in there. It just started. Andrew was the first brave pioneer willing to sully his name, associating himself with Ghost Truth. And of course, I had to do the same because it's my gimmick. So Ghost Truth is now out there. We've got 2 books, and there's more to come. And so currently is an imprint of Montag with the assistance every step of the way of Charlie, publisher of Montag Press. But at some point, may go off on its own and do its own thing. But it's hard to predict. But I'm happy that we've got it this far, and I think I like that it's there now for when you know, should a Dr. Wendy S. painting come knocking, I will have a operation in place to publish her book. So that's the Ghost Truth story. And I guess that will wrap it up. Does Scott or Andrew, do you have any last words?
Not really. I just want to say thank you for letting me be a part of this. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, same. Just thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed your evening.
Yep. Okay. Bye, everybody. And we are going to put this on YouTube later. So if you know anyone that wants to watch it, there'll be a link. And yeah, we'll post that on social media. Thanks, everyone.